For many people, faith can be a deep and abiding strength, helping them to make sense of the world. But when faith comes up against hard facts, things can get complicated. The Star by Arthur C. Clarke. Read by Karl. It is 3,000 light years to the Vatican. Once I believed that space could have no power over faith, just as I believed the heavens declared the glory of God's handiwork. Now I have seen that handiwork, and my faith is sorely troubled. I stare at the crucifix that hangs on the cabin wall above the Mark VI computer, and the first time in my life, I wonder if it is no more than an empty symbol. I have told no one yet, but the truth cannot be concealed. The facts are there for all to read, recorded on the countless miles of magnetic tape and thousands of photographs we are carrying back to Earth. Other scientists can interpret them as easily as I can, and I am not one who condone them tampering with the truth, which often gave my order a bad name in the olden days. The crew were already sufficiently depressed, wondered how they would take this ultimate irony. Few of them have any religious faith, yet they will not relish using this final weapon in their campaign against me. That private, good-natured, but fundamentally serious war was lasted all the way from Earth. It amused them to have a Jesuit as chief astrophysicist. Dr. Chandler, for example, can never get over it. Why are medical men such notorious atheists? Sometimes he would meet me on the observation deck, where the lights were always low so that the stars shine with undiminished glory. He would come out to me in the gloom and stand staring at the great oval port, while the heavens crawled slowly around us as the ship turned end over end with a residual spin we had never bothered to correct. Well, Father, he would say at last, it goes on forever and forever. Perhaps something made it. How can you believe that something had a special interest in us and our miserable little world? That just beats me. Then the argument would start, while the stars and nebula would swing around us in silent, endless area beyond the flawlessly clear plastic of the observation port. It was, I think, the apparent incredulity of my position that caused most amusement of the crew. In vain I would point to my 3 papers in the Astrophysical Journal, my 5 on the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society. I would remind them my order had long been famous for its scientific work. It may be true now. Ever since the 18th century, we have made contributions to astronomy and geophysics out of all proportion to our numbers. Will my report on the Phoenix Nebula end our 1,000 years of history? It will end, I fear, much more than that. I do not know who gave the nebula its name. It seems to me to be a very bad one. If it contains a prophecy, it is one that cannot be verified for several billion years. Even the word nebula is misleading. This is a far smaller object than those stupendous clouds of mist, the stuff of unborn stars, that are scattered throughout the length of the Milky Way. On the cosmic scale, indeed, the Phoenix Nebula is a tiny thing, a tenuous shell of gas surrounding a single star, or what is left of a star. The Rubens engraving of Loyola seems to mock me as it hangs there above the spectral photometer's tracings. What would you, Father, have made of this knowledge that has come into my keeping? So far for the little world that was all the universe you knew. Would your faith have risen to the challenge, as mine has failed to do? You gaze into the distance, Father, but I travel distance beyond any that you could have imagined when you founded our order 1,000 years ago. No other survey ship has been so far from Earth. We are at the very frontiers of the explored universe. We set out to reach the Phoenix Nebula. We succeeded. Now we are homeward bound with our burden of knowledge. Wish I could lift that burden from my shoulders, but I call to you in vain across the centuries and the light years that lie between us. On the book you are holding in your hand, the words are plain to read. I majorem Dei gloriam, the message runs. It's a message I can no longer believe. Would you still believe it? You could see what we have found? We knew, of course, what the Phoenix Nebula was. Every year, in our galaxy own, more than 100 stars explode, blazing for a few hours or days with 10,000s of their time their nova brilliance before they sink back into death and obscurity. Such are the ordinary nova, the commonplace disasters of the universe. I've recorded the spectrograms and light curves of dozens since I started working at the Lunar Observatory. But 3 or 4 times in every 1,000 years occurs something beside which even a nova pales into total insignificance. When a star becomes a supernova, it may for a little while outshine all the massed suns of the galaxy. The Chinese astronomers watched this happen in AD 1054, not knowing what it was they saw. 5 centuries later, in 1572, a supernova blazed in Cassiopeia so brightly it was visible in the daylight sky. There have been 3 more in the 1,000 years that have passed since then. Our mission was to visit the remnants of such a catastrophe. to reconstruct the events that led up to it, and if possible, to learn its cause. We came in slowly through the concentric shells of gas that had blasted out 6,000 years before, yet were expanding still. They were immensely hot, radiating even now with the first violet light, but they were too tenuous to do us any damage. When the star had exploded, its outer limits had been driven outward with such speed they escaped completely from its gravitational field. Now they formed a hollow shell large enough to engulf 1,000 solar systems. At its center burned the tiny, fantastic object which the star had now become, a white dwarf, smaller than Earth, yet weighing 1,000,000 times as much. The glowing gas shells were all around us, banishing the normal night of interstellar space. We're flying in the center of the cosmic bomb that had detonated millennia ago, and whose incandescent fragments were still hurtling apart. The immense scale of the explosion, and the fact that the debris had already covered a volume of space many millions of miles across, robbed the scene of any visible movement. It would take decades before the unaided eye could detect any motion in these tortured wisps and eddies of gas, yet the sense of turbulent expansion was overwhelming. We had checked our primary drive hours before, and were whistling slowly towards the first little star ahead. Once it had been a sun like our own, but it had squandered on a few hours the energy that should have kept it shining for 1,000,000 years. Now it was a shrunken miser, hoarding its resources as if trying to make amends for its particle youth. No one seriously expected to find planets. If there had been any before the explosion, it would have been boiled into puffs of vapor, and their substance lost in the greater wreckage of the star itself. But we made the automatic search, as we always do when approaching an unknown sun. Presently we found a single small world circling the star at an immense distance. It must have been the Pluto of this vanished star system, orbiting on the frontiers of the night. Too far from the central sun ever to have known life, its remoteness had saved it from the fate of its lost companions. The passing fires had seared its rocks and burned away the mantle of frozen gas that must have covered it in the days before the disaster. We landed, and we found the vault. The builders had made sure we should. The monolithic marker that stood above the entrance was now a fused stump, but even the first long-range photographs told us that here was the work of intelligence. A little later we found the continent-wide pattern of reactivity had been buried in the rock. Even if the pylon above the vault had been destroyed, this would have remained, and immovable an all but eternal beacon calling out to the stars. Our ship fell toward this gigantic bullseye like an arrow into its target. The pylon must have been a mile high when it was built. Now it looked like a candle had been melted down into a puddle of wax. It took us a week to drill through the fused rock, since we didn't have the proper tools for a task like this. We were astronomers, not archaeologists, but we could improvise. Our original purpose was forgotten. This lonely monument, reared with such labor at the greatest possible distance from the doomed sun, can only have one meaning. Civilization knew it was about to die had made its last bid for immortality. It would take us generations to examine all the treasures that were placed in the vault. They had plenty of time to prepare, for the sun was given its first warnings many years before the final detonation. Everything was to preserve all the fruits of their genius they brought here to the distant world in the days before the end, hoping that some other race would find it and it would not be utterly forgotten. Would we have done as well? Would we have been too lost in our own misery to give thought to a future we would never see or share? But we'd had a little more time. They could travel free enough between the planets of their own sun, but had not yet learned to cross the interstellar gulfs, and the narrow solar system was 100 light years away. Yet even had you possessed the secrets of the transplanet drive, no more than a few million could have been saved. Perhaps it was better thus. Even if they had not been so disturbingly human as their sculpture shows, we could not have helped admiring them and grieving for their fate. They left thousands of visual records on the machines for projecting them, together with elaborate pictorial instructions from which it would not be difficult to learn their written language. We examined many of these records, brought to life for the first time in 6,000 years the warmth of a beauty and civilization that in many ways must have been superior to our own. Perhaps they only showed the best, and one could hardly blame them. But their works were very lovely, and their cities were built with a grace that matched anything of man. We watched them at work and play, listened to their musical speech sounding across the centuries. One scene is still before my eyes: a group of children on a beach of strange blue sand, playing in the waves as children play on earth. Curious whip-like trees line the shore, some very large animals wading in the shallows, yet attracting no attention at all. And sinking in the sea, still warm and friendly and light-giving, is a sun that will soon turn traitor and obliterate all this innocent happiness. Perhaps if we've not been so far from home and so vulnerable to loneliness, we should not have been so deeply moved. Many of us have seen the ruins of ancient civilizations in other worlds, but they never affected us so profoundly. This tragedy was unique. It's one thing for a race to fail and die, as nations and cultures have done on Earth, but to be destroyed so completely in the full flower of its achievement, leaving no survivors. How can that be reconciled with the mercy of God? My colleagues have asked me that, and I can give what answers I can. Perhaps you could have done better, Father Loyola, but I find nothing in the Exortatus Spiritualia that helps me here. They were not an evil people. I do not know what gods they worshipped, if indeed they worshipped any. But I've looked back at them across the centuries, and have watched what the loveliness they used their lack strength to preserve was brought forward, again into the light of their shrunken sun. They could have taught us much. Why were they destroyed? You know the answers that my colleagues will give when they get back to Earth. They will say the universe has no purpose and no plan. Since 100 suns explode every year in our galaxy, at this very moment some race is dying in the depths of space. Whether that race had done good or evil during its lifetime would make no difference in the end. There is no divine justice, for there is no God. Yet, of course, what we have seen proves nothing of the sort. Anyone who argues thus is being swayed by emotion, not logic. God has no need to justify his actions to man. He built the universe, can destroy it when he chooses. It is arrogance, it is perilously near blasphemy, for us to say what he may or may not do. This I could have accepted, hard though it is to look upon whole worlds and people thrown into the furnace. But there comes a point when even the deepest faith must falter, and now, as I look at the calculations lying before me, I know I have reached that point at last. We could not tell, before we reached the nebula, how long ago the explosion took place. Now, from the astronomical evidence and the record on the rocks of that one surviving planet, I've been able to date it very exactly. I know in what year the light of this colossal conflagration reached our Earth. I know how brilliantly the supernova whose corpse now dwindles behind our speeding ship once shone in terrestrial skies. I know how it must have blazed low in the east before sunrise, like a beacon in an oriental dawn. There could be no reasonable doubt the ancient mystery is solved at last. Yet, oh God, there were so many stars you could have used. What was the need to give these people to the fire, that the symbol of their passing might shine above Bethlehem? The end.